The baby beast was thrown away. Until a human chose to fight for its life, Lieutenant Jake Morrison had always been drawn to the forgotten corners of space. As a salvage operator working the outer rim of the Centauri system, he spent his days sifting through the debris fields that littered the space lanes between civilized worlds. Most people saw only junk and scrap metal, but Jake saw stories waiting to be told. The morning that changed, everything started like any other. His ship, the Horizon's Edge, drifted silently through a particularly dense debris field left behind by what appeared to be a massive space battle. The scanner readings showed the usual mix of twisted hull fragments and scattered cargo containers, but something else caught his attention. A faint life sign, barely registering on his instruments, pulsed weakly from within a damaged alien vessel. Jake maneuvered his ship closer to investigate. The alien craft was unlike anything in the standard databases, its organic-looking hull covered in what appeared to be scales that still shimmered with residual energy. Massive tears in the ship's side revealed that it had been deliberately torn apart, not destroyed in battle. This was the work of scavengers, beings who stripped ships of anything valuable and left the rest to drift in the void. As Jake suited up for Eva, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The life sign was growing weaker by the hour, and whatever was trapped inside that wreckage wouldn't survive much longer without help. His training told him to report the find to the authorities and wait for a proper xenobiology team, but Jake had never been one to follow protocol. When lives were at stake, the interior of the alien vessel was a maze of twisted corridors and collapsed chambers. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as Jake made his way deeper into the ship, following the life sign readings on his scanner. The air was thick with the metallic scent of ozone and something else, something organic that made his skin crawl. But he pressed on, driven by a determination that had gotten him into trouble more times than he could count. In what appeared to be a cargo hold, Jake found the source of the life sign, huddled in a corner, surrounded by the remains of a shattered containment unit, was a creature that took his breath away. It was roughly the size of a large dog, but its body was covered in scales that shifted color with each labored breath. 4 legs ended in claws that looked capable of tearing through metal, and a pair of wings lay folded against its sides, one clearly broken and bleeding a luminescent fluid. But it was the creature's eyes that stopped Jake cold. They were large and intelligent, filled with pain and fear, but also something else. Hope. The creature was looking directly at him, and Jake felt an almost overwhelming sense of recognition, as if he was looking at a kindred spirit trapped in an alien form. Jake knelt slowly, keeping his movements calm and deliberate. The creature didn't flee or attack, but watched him with those remarkable eyes. As he examined the broken wing, Jake could see that the injury was severe, but not necessarily fatal. The creature had been left to die, abandoned by whoever had owned it when it became too damaged to be useful. The realization filled Jake with a cold anger. Throughout human history, there had always been those who viewed other beings as property, as things to be used and discarded when they became inconvenient. He had hoped that expanding into space would have left such attitudes behind, but apparently some evils were universal. Jake carefully lifted the creature, surprised by how light it felt despite its size. The creature didn't resist seeming to understand that he was trying to help. As he carried it back to his ship, Jake made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He wasn't going to report this to the authorities. He wasn't going to let this magnificent being become another specimen in a research facility. He was going to help it heal, and then he was going to find out who had done this to it. The creature's eyes never left his face during the journey back to the ship, and Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. Back aboard the Horizon's Edge, Jake worked frantically to create a suitable environment for his unexpected passenger. The creature, which he had begun thinking of as Phoenix, due to its ability to shimmer like flames, seemed to understand that it was safe for the first time in what Jake suspected had been a very long time. Dr. Rachel Webb, Jake's former colleague, and the only xenobiologist he trusted completely, arrived at his remote station within 18 hours of his encrypted distress call. She had always been willing to bend the rules when it came to helping injured beings, regardless of their species or legal status. Rachel's first examination of Phoenix revealed anatomy unlike anything in the known databases. The creature's bone structure was incredibly light yet strong, designed for both flight and surprising durability. Its scales contained specialized cells that could generate and store energy, explaining the bioluminescent properties Jake had observed. Most remarkably, brain scans showed neural complexity that rivaled or exceeded most known sentient species, but it was Phoenix's behavior that truly amazed them both. The creature seemed to understand their conversations, responding to questions with specific gestures and even attempting to communicate through a series of musical tones that varied in pitch and rhythm. When Jake spoke directly to it, Phoenix would tilt its head and make soft chirping sounds that somehow conveyed gratitude and trust. The healing process revealed Phoenix's remarkable resilience. Within days, the broken wing began to mend with the help of Rachel's advanced medical techniques. Phoenix's natural healing abilities were extraordinary, enhanced by what appeared to be a deep emotional bond forming with its human caregivers. The creature's scales grew brighter and more vibrant as its health improved, creating patterns that seemed to reflect its emotional state. Jake found himself spending hours each day with Phoenix, learning to interpret its various sounds and gestures. The creature was incredibly intelligent, quickly mastering simple tasks and even showing what appeared to be a sense of humor. When Jake accidentally knocked over a container of medical supplies, Phoenix made a series of sounds that Rachel swore sounded like laughter, but their peaceful recovery period was shattered when long-range sensors detected 3 ships approaching Jake's station. The vessels bore the markings of the hegemony, a loose alliance of alien races known for their involvement in the illegal trade of sentient beings. Jake's blood ran cold as he realized that Phoenix's former captors had somehow tracked them down. The lead ship broadcast a message in standard Galactic common, demanding the immediate return of their property. The alien speaking identified himself as Overlord Krex, and his tone made it clear that he viewed Phoenix as nothing more than valuable cargo that had been stolen from him. Jake's response was swift and uncompromising. He had never been one to back down from a fight, especially when innocent lives were at stake. He activated his ship's defensive systems and prepared for what he knew would be a difficult battle. The Horizon's Edge was a salvage vessel, not a warship, but Jake had made several modifications over the years that would give him a fighting chance. Phoenix seemed to sense the danger, its scales flickering with agitated colors as it moved closer. To Jake, the creature's eyes held a new expression, one that Jake recognized as determination. Phoenix wasn't going to be taken without a fight, and neither was Jake. The battle began with a barrage of weapons fire that lit up the void around the station. Jake's ship was smaller and more maneuverable than the hegemony vessels, but they had superior firepower and numbers. As the fight intensified, Jake realized that conventional tactics wouldn't be enough to win this confrontation. That's when Phoenix did something extraordinary. The creature began to glow with an intense inner light, and Jake felt a strange tingling sensation in his mind. Suddenly, he could sense Phoenix's thoughts and emotions directly, as if they were connected by an invisible thread. The creature was offering to share its abilities, to fight alongside him as an equal partner, rather than a helpless passenger. Jake accepted the bond without hesitation, and immediately felt his perception expand. Through Phoenix's enhanced senses, he could detect the enemy's movements with incredible precision, anticipating their attacks before they were even launched. The creature's natural ability to manipulate energy fields allowed Jake to boost his ship's power systems beyond their normal limits. Working together, human and alien fought with a coordination that defied explanation. Jake's tactical expertise, combined with Phoenix's extraordinary abilities, created a fighting force that the hegemony ships were unprepared to face. The battle that should have been a massacre became a rout, with 2 enemy vessels destroyed, and the third fleeing back into hyperspace. In the aftermath, Jake looked at Phoenix with new understanding. This wasn't just a rescued animal, or even a sentient being seeking freedom. This was a partner, a friend, and perhaps something even more significant. In the weeks following the battle, Jake and Phoenix discovered that their bond had awakened something much larger than either of them had imagined. Phoenix's telepathic abilities, enhanced by the emotional connection with its human companion, had reached out across the galaxy to touch the minds of others like it. The response was overwhelming. Across dozens of star systems, creatures identical to Phoenix began to stir in their cages and containment units. The hegemony had been collecting these beings for centuries, using them as exotic pets, gladiatorial fighters, or worse. But Phoenix's call had awakened something primal in its species, a collective consciousness that had been dormant for generations. Jake found himself at the center of a growing network of desperate beings reaching out for help. Through Phoenix, he could sense their pain, their fear, and their hope. Each mind that joined the network added to the collective strength, creating a web of consciousness that spanned the known galaxy. Dr. Webb had established a research facility on Jake's station, officially studying xenobiological phenomena, but actually serving as a coordination center for what was becoming the largest underground rescue operation in galactic history. The creatures that Phoenix could contact were not just scattered randomly across space. They were concentrated in specific locations, facilities that the hegemony used as breeding centers and training grounds. The first rescue mission took place on a remote moon in the Vega system. Jake had upgraded the Horizon's Edge with advanced stealth technology and weapons systems, transforming his salvage vessel into a formidable rescue ship. Phoenix accompanied him on every mission, its abilities essential for locating and communicating with the captive creatures. The facility they targeted was a nightmare of steel and concrete, housing dozens of Phoenix's kind in conditions that would have been considered torture by any civilized standard. The creatures were kept in isolation, their natural telepathic abilities suppressed by neural dampeners that caused constant pain. Many showed signs of psychological trauma that would take years to heal. Jake's assault on the facility was swift and decisive. His ship's enhanced weapon systems, guided by Phoenix's telepathic targeting, eliminated the automated defenses before the guards could react. The rescue itself was a carefully orchestrated operation, with Phoenix communicating directly with the captives to coordinate their escape. The freed creatures were transported to a series of hidden colonies that Jake and Dr. Webb had established throughout the Outer Rim. These sanctuaries were designed to accommodate the species' unique needs, with plenty of space for flight in areas where they could gather to strengthen their telepathic bonds. Each new addition to the network made the collective stronger and more capable of coordinating rescue efforts. But the hegemony wasn't sitting idle. Overlord Krex had returned with a much larger fleet, determined to reclaim his property and eliminate the human who had cost him so much profit. Intelligence reports suggested that he was planning a massive offensive against all known sanctuary sites, using overwhelming force to crush the growing resistance. Jake knew that conventional defensive tactics wouldn't be enough to protect the hundreds of creatures now under his care. The hegemony's military might was simply too great for a ragtag collection of rescue ships and converted freighters to face in open combat. But Phoenix and its kind possessed abilities that went far beyond what their captors had ever imagined. The creatures' telepathic network wasn't just useful for communication. When working together, It could manipulate energy fields on a massive scale, creating phenomena that defied known physics. Jake had witnessed Phoenix generate powerful electromagnetic pulses, bend light around itself to become invisible, and even create temporary rifts in space-time that allowed for instantaneous travel across vast distances. The plan that emerged from their collective brainstorming was audacious beyond anything Jake had ever attempted. Instead of trying to fight the hegemony fleet directly, they would use the creature's combined abilities to turn the enemy's own weapons against them. The telepathic network would coordinate a galaxy-wide assault on hegemony installations, striking simultaneously at targets across dozens of star systems. Jake found himself commanding a force unlike anything in galactic history. Hundreds of phoenixes, kind, freed from their captivity and eager for justice, combined their abilities under his tactical guidance. The network that had begun as a desperate cry for help had evolved into something far more powerful, a collective consciousness capable of reshaping the balance of power in the galaxy. As the hegemony fleet approached the primary sanctuary, Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He was no longer just a salvage operator who had rescued a single creature. He had become the leader of a revolution that would determine the fate of an entire species. Phoenix settled beside him on the bridge, its scales shimmering with calm confidence. Through their bond, Jake could feel the creature's absolute trust in him and the determination of hundreds of others who had chosen to follow a human into battle against their former oppressors. The final confrontation was about to begin. The hegemony fleet that emerged from hyperspace was the largest military force Jake had ever seen. Over 200 warships of various classes spread across the void, their weapons trained on the sanctuary worlds that had become home to phoenixes. Liberated people. Overlord Krex's flagship, a massive dreadnought bristling with exotic weapons, took position at the center of the formation. Jake's fleet looked pitiful in comparison. 30 converted freighters, a handful of military surplus vessels, and his own modified Horizon's Edge faced impossible odds. But Jake had learned not to judge his allies by conventional standards. The creatures that Phoenix's kind had become were far more than they appeared. The battle began with Krex's typical arrogance. The hegemony overlord broadcast a message across all frequencies, demanding the immediate surrender of all stolen property and threatening to glass the sanctuary worlds if his demands were not met. Jake's response was silence, but across the telepathic network, hundreds of minds prepared for coordinated action. Phoenix stood beside Jake on the bridge, its scales now blazing with patterns of light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the collective consciousness of its species. Through their bond, Jake could feel the presence of every creature in the network, their individual personalities blending into a unified force of will and determination. The first phase of the battle shocked the hegemony forces as their ships opened fire with devastating barrages of plasma and exotic particles. The energy beams simply vanished into space. The creature's collective telepathic abilities were creating interference patterns that disrupted the coherence of directed energy. Weapons, rendering the fleet's primary armaments useless. Krex's response was swift and brutal. If energy weapons wouldn't work, he would resort to kinetic bombardment and nuclear warheads. The massive dreadnought launched a spread of planet-killer missiles toward the largest sanctuary world, weapons capable of cracking a planet's crust and sterilizing all life on the surface. Jake watched in amazement as Phoenix's people responded to the threat. The creature's combined will reached out across space, grasping the incoming missiles with invisible hands of pure thought. The warheads slowed, stopped, and then began to turn back toward the ships that had launched them. The hegemony's own weapons became instruments of their destruction as missile after missile found its mark among the enemy fleet. But the true demonstration of power came when Phoenix itself took direct action. Jake felt his companion's consciousness expand, reaching out through the network to touch every member of their species. The creature's scales began to glow with an intensity that forced Jake to shield his eyes, and suddenly, the very fabric of space around the battlefield began to warp and twist. The creatures were manipulating gravity itself, creating pockets of distorted space-time that pulled hegemony ships out of formation and sent them tumbling helplessly through the void. Some vessels were crushed by artificial gravitational fields that compressed their hulls like tin cans. Others were flung away from the battlefield at velocities that would carry them beyond the galaxy's edge. Jake's role in the battle was that of a coordinator, using his tactical expertise to guide the creature's devastating abilities toward maximum effect. Through Phoenix, he could communicate with the entire network simultaneously, directing their attacks with surgical precision. The chaotic fury of the creature's revenge was channeled into a disciplined assault that systematically dismantled the hegemony fleet. Overlord Krex's flagship was the last to fall. The massive dreadnought's shields and armor were useless against attacks that bypassed physical defenses entirely. Jake watched through the bridge's view screen as the ship's hull began to buckle under impossible stresses, its superstructure twisting into geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. The hegemony, Overlord's final transmission, was a mixture of rage and disbelief. He had never imagined that his livestock possessed such devastating capabilities, had never conceived that creatures he viewed as property could become the architects of his empire's destruction. His screams of fury were cut short as his ship imploded into a gravitational singularity that Phoenix's people had created specifically for that purpose. In the aftermath of the battle, Jake found himself looking out at a debris field that stretched across several light minutes of space. The hegemony fleet that had seemed so invincible just hours before was now nothing more than twisted metal and cooling plasma. Not a single enemy vessel had escaped to carry word of the defeat back to their masters. But Jake knew that this victory was just the beginning. The hegemony was vast, with resources and fleets scattered across hundreds of star systems. Word of the creature's abilities would spread, and soon every slave-holding civilization in the galaxy would see them as a threat to be eliminated rather than property to be exploited. Phoenix moved closer to Jake, its scales now displaying patterns that seemed to convey both satisfaction and determination. Through their bond, Jake could feel the creature's thoughts turning toward the future, toward the long struggle that lay ahead. The network of liberated beings was growing stronger with each passing day, but they would need allies among the free, peoples of the galaxy, if they were to survive what was coming. Jake placed his hand on Phoenix's warm scales and felt the creature's trust flowing through their connection. Together, they had accomplished something that many would have thought impossible. They had proven that the bonds between different species could transcend the artificial barriers that divided the galaxy, and that even the most powerful oppressors could be defeated when faced with the combined will of those who refused to accept slavery. The war for freedom was far from over, but Jake Morrison and Phoenix had fired the first shot in a revolution that would reshape the galaxy. 6 months after the Battle of the Sanctuary, Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of New Haven Station, watching as ships from across the galaxy docked at the massive facility. The station had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a meeting place where dozens of species worked together as equals, united by their shared commitment to freedom and justice. Phoenix soared through the vast central chamber of the station, its scales now displaying complex patterns that represented the collective consciousness of its entire species. The creature that Jake had rescued from that derelict ship had become something more than either of them had imagined, a living symbol of the bond between human determination and alien wisdom. The network of liberated beings had grown exponentially, now encompassing thousands of Phoenix's kind scattered across the galaxy. Each new addition to the collective strengthened their abilities, and expanded their influence. What had begun as a desperate rescue mission had evolved into a galactic reformation that was reshaping the balance of power throughout known space. Dr. Webb approached Jake with her latest report, her face showing the exhaustion and satisfaction of someone who had witnessed miracles on a daily basis. The research facility on New Haven had become a center of xenobiological study that attracted scientists from hundreds of worlds, all eager to understand the telepathic abilities that had made the revolution possible. The creature's powers extended far beyond what they had initially demonstrated. Working together, they could manipulate matter at the subatomic level, creating new materials and technologies that seemed to violate the known laws of physics, could communicate instantly across galactic distances, coordinate complex operations involving thousands of participants, and even influence the thoughts and emotions of other species when necessary. But perhaps their most remarkable ability was their capacity for healing. Not just physical injuries, but the psychological trauma that came from generations of slavery and abuse. The collective consciousness served as a therapeutic network, allowing damaged minds to draw strength from the community and find peace in ways that conventional medicine had never achieved. Jake had witnessed the transformation firsthand. Creatures that had been broken by years of captivity slowly regained their confidence and joy, their scales brightening as they reconnected with their true nature. The savage fighters that the hegemony had trained became teachers and healers, using their abilities to help others rather than to inflict pain. The political ramifications of the revolution were staggering. The hegemony's defeat had sent shockwaves through the galactic community, forcing every civilization to reconsider their policies towards sentient beings. Species that had relied on slave labor for centuries found themselves facing economic collapse, as their workforce simply vanished, transported to safety by the growing network of liberated creatures. But the revolution had also created new opportunities. The technologies developed through human-alien cooperation were revolutionizing industry, medicine, and space travel. The telepathic network had become a communication system that connected worlds in ways that had never been possible before. Trade and cultural exchange flourished as barriers between species dissolved. Jake's role in the new order was that of a mediator and coordinator. His unique bond with Phoenix gave him insights into the collective consciousness that few other beings could understand. He spent his days resolving conflicts between different species, negotiating agreements that would have been impossible without telepathic communication, and planning the next phase of the liberation campaign. The next target was the core worlds, the heavily fortified center of the old galactic order, where the most powerful slave-holding civilizations maintained their strongholds. It would be the most dangerous mission yet, requiring coordination between thousands of liberated beings and their allies across dozens of star systems. As Jake prepared for the campaign, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. A simple salvage operation had led to the discovery of a creature that seemed like nothing more than an injured animal. But Phoenix had proven to be something far greater, a teacher, a partner, and ultimately a catalyst for the transformation of galactic civilization. The bond between human and alien had become a template for cooperation that was being replicated across the galaxy. Other species were learning to work together in ways that transcended their biological differences, creating alliances based on mutual respect rather than domination and exploitation. Phoenix landed beside Jake on the observation deck, its scales displaying patterns that conveyed contentment and anticipation. Through their connection, Jake could feel the creature's awareness of the vast network of minds that stretched across the galaxy, each one a beacon of hope in a universe that had been dark for too long. The baby beast that had been thrown away by uncaring aliens had become the heart of a revolution that would echo through the ages. And the human who had chosen to fight for its life had discovered that sometimes the greatest victories come not from conquest, but from the simple act of caring for another being. Together, they watched as the sun set over New Haven Station, painting the void in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight, and new worlds to liberate. But tonight, Jake Morrison and Phoenix could rest in the knowledge that they had already changed the galaxy forever. The age of slavery was ending. The age of freedom had begun. And at the center of it all was a bond between species that proved that the universe's greatest power was not technology or weapons, but the simple willingness to see another being as worthy of love and protection. The revolution would continue, but its foundation was already unshakable. The day a human chose to fight for a creature that others had thrown away, and discovered that in saving one life, he had saved them all.